It's those everyday small comments that you might hear people make that aren't quite blatantly sexist or racist, but you know that it's coming from a place of bias.
Yep.
And the biggest thing with that is what I talk about in my work is that the culmination of those is what makes you feel like you don't belong.
I'm Brandon Dawson, and this is The Distiller, a podcast about how we find meaningful work and how we find meaning in the work we do. My guest for this episode is Myra Ballentine. Myra is the managing partner and social inclusion specialist at VECTRE, a virtual reality and augmented reality startup in Cincinnati's North Side neighborhood. If you don't know what virtual and augmented reality are, or even if you do, but you don't know how VR and AR can be used to educate and train around areas of bias and discrimination, well, stick around. You're about to find out. Myra and I met early on Memorial Day morning, Monday morning at Sidewinder Coffee, just down Hamilton Avenue from the VECTRE offices here in Cincinnati. Behind us throughout the show, you can hear Brandon and the Sidewinder crew starting the day, including the wafting strains of punk bands from the front room during the second half of the show. This show is such a wonderful distillation of why these conversations are so interesting to me. Myra's work story includes a lot of our main themes: following our dreams through adversity, finding meaningful work, sometimes where and when we least expect it, and the value and the satisfaction of pursuing the areas that are meaningful to us, even when circumstances seem to throw endless roadblocks in the way. And at the heart of it all is this wonderful mashup of technology and social inclusion that the VECTRE team and Myra have created. It's all in there. So here is my conversation with Myra Ballentine on The Distiller. Let's do it. Cheers.
Cheers.
Good morning and welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming on this early Memorial Day morning.
Yeah, I'm glad to be here.
We have been trying to set this up for a long time.
I know.
Really
has it been like
excited to
2
talk.
months?
It has.
It's like back and forth, like not this week, but we
Yeah.
did it.
And since
did it.
we first met one table over here
That's
at
right.
Sidewinder. Well, let's start off. Tell us, just in the simplest terms, because we'll kind of build the stage a little bit, but tell us what you do very simply right now.
Okay, so right now, I have a startup with my husband.
Mm-hmm.
It's a virtual reality and augmented reality development company. So right now, our focus is on creating experiences that are about bias.
Mm-hmm.
So allowing you to stand in someone else's shoes and understand from their perspective the daily microaggressions and biases that they might face. So like one of our experiences right now is being a woman in the workplace.
Yep.
What does that feel like?
Cool.
So it's kind of an assessment tool for companies to be able to see, because we can collect a lot of data in there. So it's like,
Right.
Are you noticing bias? Like you have to click every time you notice bias. And
Yeah,
at the end, we have a bunch of questions so we can like give you a report of your company at the end,
Okay.
an assessment.
Cool. So we will get really deep into that because
okay.
that work and the other things that you guys do, I'm very interested in.
Okay.
But I would imagine there's a lot of people listening who have no idea what augmented reality is, who have no idea what the difference between virtual reality and augmented reality is, and have no idea how you would start a company, period, much less start a startup like that. So tell us, give us a little bit of your story. Go back kind of as far as you want to go. You're not originally from Cincinnati. You moved here with your husband, mm-hmm. And I don't want to tell
Sure.
your story, but how do you, because you're a woman in the tech world, it's a very male-dominated
Yep.
world. Tell us about your education and whatever is relevant to sort of how you get to this point. So where are you from originally?
So I was born in Pakistan,
Okay.
lived there most up till like 13 years old, and then I moved to Thailand for a bit, and then like back and forth. So, you know, the work that we're doing is a huge passion of mine. So it's always been about like, for me, about like justice and about like social justice, but
Right.
also like cognitive justice. You know.
Yeah.
And I think I was very heavily influenced by seeing my parents work. So my dad is a doctor, and my mom and him basically left a really like cushy, you know, hospital compound and stuff in Pakistan, and ended up going to really far in the north where it was super remote. And they actually started a hospital because there was no medical care there at the time. And there wasn't even proper roads and things like that. So I grew up there. So very much aware of like the social entrepreneurial lifestyle that my parents had.
Not necessarily a tech background.
Not tech at all. Just about doing good for the world and like making a difference. And I was like on the front line seeing my parents do that.
Was that something that growing up that your father, that both of your parents talked to you explicitly about? The moral or social justice aspect of it, or did it just come through?
I think for my parents, it was my dad sort of used that hospital way in the north in a really remote area to actually empower people. So to bring people from different parts of the country and come and work there and kind of train them. So he's doing good for the people in that remote area, right?
Yeah.
And like providing medical care, but then he's also bringing people to like train them to be like, lab techs and things like that. So it wasn't something, like we're from a Christian background, so obviously we talk a lot about, we go to church and like talk about morals and stuff all the time, but it was that actually seeing it lived out is what actually, at least for me, creates an impact. So,
Cool. And then when it comes time for you to start making decisions about school and career, how did that, were you all into, a lot of people grow up in a Christian background and the first thing they think of when they go to school is like, or just getting completely away from it.
Oh, okay.
What was your, as you were starting to make those decisions about college, what were your motivating factors?
So I really wanted to do law school, actually.
Okay.
Again, the whole justice thing coming out, but it didn't really work out for me for a lot of reasons, for me to like go to the UK to the school that I wanted to go. So my parents kind of wanted me to stay home. So the closest they would let me go was Thailand, actually, because I'd already been and they felt comfortable.
Yeah.
My parents actually, like in true fashion of a lot of South Asian parents, wanted me to be a doctor. And so two of my siblings are doctors, so they got that. I was kind of the black sheep, but I at one point my mom, they were trying to figure out like what I should do. And I was like, Mom, I just don't want to touch people. Like, I'm just going to wear gloves all the time. She's like, okay, you should not be a doctor. I was like, okay, good. I'm out. For me, I was always interested in, at that point, like I knew I wanted to do something that was going to make a difference. I didn't know what that was going to be, so I ended up choosing something pretty general and it went to business school. I was like, management's going to help me do whatever I want. I wasn't quite sure, but once I got in there, I was like, okay, I'm going to work something in the nonprofit world, like always back to that, how can I help the marginalized group,
So you go to school in Thailand, graduate with a degree in business management. Okay, and then what?
And then, so at that point, I was like, okay, I know that I want to go back to Pakistan. So that was kind of like a goal that I had. And, again, one of the things, like I said, my parents had a huge impact, their work did. And one of the things that I remember, like, as a young kid, sometimes sitting in the hospital with my dad was just being very aware, at 3 or 4 years old, the way that women were treated over men in a lot of Muslim countries, but specifically in Pakistan. And just knowing the difference that, the celebration when a boy was born versus a girl. Then also hearing like from patients, kind of bruised and battered patients coming in and saying like, I didn't produce a boy. And it was just really. So those kind of things, like kids are smart. And I was just like acutely aware, there's like something messed up. And I think from that young age, I was like, even stories of, look, I was able to go to a really good school, but most of the girls in my village were kept home because maybe the families could only afford to send the boys and I was like, this is just not fair. So that was kind of in me as well. And I think like all these things kind of culminated to me being like, I want to go back and like work with marginalized groups. So like religiously persecuted people, like Christians, but especially females. Like that was my big thing. So I graduated college and actually ended up like teaching a little bit, got into like the education space, which was just life-changing for me and actually ended up making me want to go to grad school in specifically about learning and development. So I was pretty lucky. I had a couple of professors actually from Harvard, and then like one of my roommates was also from Harvard, and they kind of encouraged me like, hey, you should go apply to Harvard. And I had said to my dad, because I had said, okay, I'm going to go to school in Thailand, but when it comes to grad school, like I'm going to a good school. Like I had that.
Wherever I want to go, I'm going.
I'm going. So that in itself was like a huge journey just to even feel the confidence to apply for that because, and then ended up in grad school in Boston.
Wow. Cambridge, going to Harvard.
Yeah.
The whole thing.
Shebang. Yeah.
Yeah. And that was your first time to the U.S.?
That was my first time. So I didn't feel, I've grown up in international schools, so kind of with kids all over the world. So I've been like very aware. So it wasn't exactly like that culture shock. Some things were like a culture shock that like, oh, you have the right of way when you cross the road. Like in other countries,
functional things.
Yeah,
right.
I was like, oh, like in Thailand, you're going to get run over if you try crossing. You have to be really careful. So just little things like that. But otherwise, it was like, oh, I've been around this my whole life.
Yeah, it's a very international environment there.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you weren't too surprised by it.
Yeah.
And so you're studying what?
So it's a program called Mind Brain Education. So it's about like learning and development, and then bringing in neuroscience and psychology. Yeah.
I didn't know that. I think I actually have a friend who graduated from that program.
Really?
Yeah, Annabelle Ferber is a friend of mine from Vermont. Anyway, we'll talk.
Oh, okay. I'll have to look on LinkedIn.
Talk about it later.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's a very specific program. And you finished that. How long is that program?
I did it in a year. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then with what goal? What happens?
Yeah. So even to get to Harvard, the whole thing for me was, hey, after I finished school and got really into like learning, and I want to provide educational opportunities to women in Pakistan. I was like, I'm going to Harvard with this goal in mind, and I had a whole group of people supporting me to go. Okay. Financially too, and just like, hey, I'm going, and it was like this, set out this trajectory for myself. Like, I'm coming back, and I'm going to be working with these women. I'm going to work with these marginalized groups and give them opportunities, and like, maybe at the government level, like try to change policy and stuff. So for those of you who don't know, like Pakistan has like one of the highest rates of kids out of school. Like it's pretty horrendous. Yeah. Say more about that. At all ages, just children not attending school, or kids dropping out of school as they grow older? Or? Both. So not attending, because there is public schools, and that's an issue in itself where like they're just not that great. But, for a lot of parents, you still have to buy the uniform, you still have to buy the books, you have to pay for transport, and you just can't afford that, and they rather the kids be working with them. Okay. So that's one. But then also for girls, as they get older, especially when they start getting their period, there's not like good bathrooms and stuff, which actually, some of them once a month, they're not going to school, they fall behind, and then usually they just end up dropping out. So that's the highest, both in India and Pakistan, when they're watching. Okay,
so not only just not attending school, but child labor, being put to work very, very early.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Whole range of
issues.
Problems.
Yeah. So,
and you're thinking
like, let me go and at least touch one point.
Okay,
like,
great.
Yeah. So that was the vision that I went to grad school with, and a lot of people were behind me in that, and so that was the plan.
That was the plan, which you say ominously. If this was a TV show, we'd be like, when we return.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So a lot of things happened in that year, but it was definitely, for me to go back home. I had been away from home, so I went to boarding school. So I've been in boarding school since 6.5 years old. Okay. So I've never really had a year at home, and my other siblings have spent, after they graduated from high school, they ended up going to college at home. So they got to live with my parents and stuff. Right. And I've always said, I really want that year at home with my mom, especially so that was also part of my motivation of going back. So as grad school, I got into the second semester. I was in a very a long-term relationship for about 5 years, and I went through a depressive phase, and I ended up ending that relationship. Not that it was even bad, it was just I'm kind of a new phase of my life, So when that relationship ended, it was also that guy was going to be staying in America. So I was like, oh, this is good. Now I have no more ties. I'm going back home, because that was going to be a bit of an issue when it came down, I'm going back to Pakistan. So I was like, oh, I'm home free and ready to go. And then, I ended up meeting someone.
Like always happens.
Yeah. So, like a true millennial tech story, we actually met online, and I just gotten out of a relationship, and I wasn't really being serious, but we became friends, and slowly it got like more and more serious, and then I was like, oh no, like now what, you
Right.
know? And
It's gonna ruin everything.
Yeah, it's gonna ruin everything. So, I mean, so it's the guy that it's the guy that I ended up with, but
Yes, of course.
that's why I'm here. But he knew from the beginning. I was just like, hey, this is a really important part of my life, and I'm going back.
Yeah.
Like, and as we got more and more serious, we talked about getting married, and we were like, okay, like maybe we would stay here a couple of years and then go back. So that was the idea.
Yeah.
And we ended up getting engaged, and we talked about the wedding, and even for the wedding, like his family did not want to come to Pakistan, and a bunch of stuff had just happened. Like, I think a church had just been attacked in Pakistan. So as Christians, like I said, like there's persecution, and it's
there was
real. Like
a lot going on.
Yeah.
Right.
So and I totally understood. Like I was afraid for my own family, even though I've like been through this multiple times.
Yeah.
So for a family that's American and like never really left the country, that was really scary. So and also for my husband Michael, like kind of demotivated him to push for Pakistan.
Sure, sure.
So those kind of things were happening, and we ended up having our wedding here, and my parents came and stuff, and it was wonderful. But I think slowly it also, and in the last few years, like a lot more has happened to the Christian community, and I think that sort of made me worried about my family, but also like less motivation for Michael to be like, hey, let's go. Like this is really great time to go. And we may still go, but I think that was sort of hard for me, right? Like I had this whole idea of what my job was going to be, what the work I would be doing with my life, and like so passionate, and all these people behind me financially supporting me through grad school. And it was, I kind of went through like a bit of depression, I'd say, for like 2 years of, I moved here, right, with Michael, and had a great job of getting to use my skills like organizational development and working with teams and inclusion.
Yeah.
But
well, and let's not skip over that.
Oh,
so
okay.
Because when you say you moved here, you moved to Cincinnati.
Yeah, so we got married.
Michael's family is from?
Michael's family's from Loveland, so I moved to Loveland.
All right. For people that aren't from here, Loveland is a suburb of Cincinnati, just to the north.
Yeah.
Yeah. So basically, from
suburbia.
From suburbia
Yeah.
in Cincinnati, and so you got this plan. You go to college in Thailand. You're going to go home. You're going to go to college in the United States. You're going to go home.
Yeah.
Fall in love with somebody, get married. That's all wonderful. Political climate.
Yeah.
The logistics of it. All of that means, well,
Yeah.
the dream is
Slowly.
delayed and deferred.
Yeah.
And so what is, so you both graduate. Michael moves here, why, other than family?
So he was actually in Columbus at the time.
Okay.
Yeah. So he moved here for basically to Loveland, like, oh, we're going to get married, so like, let's have some stability.
Okay.
So, part of when you talk about political climate, definitely what's happening in Pakistan, but also, it was a little bit scary for us because a lot of political climate was changing here in terms of immigration.
Of course. Yeah.
And that was one thing where Michael was like, dude, like if you leave for
You may
a year,
not get back.
yeah. And that was like his big fear.
Yeah, which is entirely reasonable. I
Right.
have friends, I have a friend who just married a woman from Scotland. Immediately after they got married, she couldn't get back into the country for, I think it ended up being, they said it was going to be 3 months. I think it ended up being 8 or 9.
Wow, yeah.
So that is a very real fear. You go back
Right.
to Pakistan, you may never make it back.
Exactly, yeah. So I think that was also part of, there was a big mix of what led us to like staying here.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, we moved to Cincinnati because he's from here, from, Loveland. And
But not to sell it, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but not to sell it short, the depression is real and is
Yeah.
very understandable. You're forever away from your home. The only
Yeah.
place you really know in the States is Boston and Cambridge.
Yeah.
Yes, you're in love, this is wonderful, you're getting married, but you're moving to a place you've never been, and
And in the election era, it was
that had
a
to have
little
been
bit of a
really
shock.
hard. Yeah.
It was definitely, yeah. And at first I was like, oh, this is going to be great. And honestly, growing up in such diverse contexts was very difficult for me in Loveland at first.
Yeah.
One, you're just like really closed off in general in suburbs, but
Right.
then it was just very homogenous. And in general, people hadn't weren't exposed to a lot of different things, so I was always like sticking out, kind of.
Yeah.
You know?
It's funny. On an earlier episode, I interviewed Anne-Marie and Luis, who are from Venezuela. When they moved to Cincinnati, they moved to Loveland. They moved in.
That's hilarious.
They moved in with family in Loveland, but still, they said exactly the same thing. Like, here we are. This is a very white suburban neighborhood. We stick out like a sore thumb.
Yeah. And I think it's important to note there that I had grown up with white people my whole life, but the difference was that they had been very exposed to a lot of different people and places. And in general, just speaking in generalities, that's not the case in Loveland.
Yeah, and we're it's lovely people in Loveland.
Yes, yeah.
It's a beautiful place, but still it is white suburban America for the most part,
Yeah. So, and at that point I was still, pretty excited and like, I'm starting a new life, Yeah. But then with the immigration stuff also, I wasn't able to work for like 8 months.
Okay.
They cut my visa right then, like my work visa, as soon as we got married. So it took, and everything was delayed. So that kind of added to the, what am I doing with my life now? I had this huge plan, and here I am sitting in suburbia, just...
Right, kind of cut off. It's
cut
far
off,
enough
totally
north
cut
that
off.
you're not in the public transit.
Yeah.
You can't get into downtown, you can't travel, you can't see the city very
I couldn't get
easily.
my license then either because I didn't have my visa. So I was very cut off,
And Michael's working. He's here for a job.
Yeah.
Moves.
So he ended up starting at a company up in Blue Ash, and he's a VR developer, so he started their VR development firm, or department. So that was going really well, and that was cool to see, at least for one of us, that we were doing what we were really passionate about.
Right.
And so I'm kind of waiting for my visa and stuff, and at this time, my background is in like inclusion stuff, so I'm like very aware of just racial stuff going on around me and like biases, and being in Loveland, again, people aren't exposed to that much stuff, so I was just like surrounded by this stuff and constantly made to feel like, oh, I don't belong. And that was just added to the whole, what am I doing with my life, And for people, for someone who's actually like in this work, it's just you're much more sensitive to it.
Yeah,
I'm like noticing
to it, so you're seeing it.
I'm noticing every single microaggression, and not if it's just against me, but just generally talking about people of color and people from other countries, and just having to sit through that was like very difficult for me.
Do me a favor. This was informative for me.
Microaggressions.
I just don't want to I don't want to skip over that term. There are people who may not know what that term means, and microaggression is a term that has become much more in the cultural dialogue. But from your perspective, for somebody that may not have heard that term, describe what a microaggression is.
So a microaggression it's those, so micros meaning really small. It's those everyday small comments that you might hear or people make that aren't quite blatantly sexist or racist, but that it's coming from a place of bias.
Yep.
And the biggest thing with that is what I talk about in my work is that the culmination of those is what makes you feel like you don't belong.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So somebody might say, well, I'm not racist, but...
Yeah.
And that's maybe more than micro, but those little tiny things that the cumulative impact of. And I think that's something, we'll get into this, I think that's something that people that don't know, that don't experience...
Yes.
They haven't ever been excluded. They haven't ever been,
Yeah.
Treated that way. They have no idea what the cumulative effect of those microaggressions is, and it's really easy to say, "Well, that wasn't that big a deal. Why can't you just get over
that
it?"
one-off, like, what's the big
because
deal?
you experience 1,000 of those every day, or more. So,
actually, and what's interesting about that is for Michael too, who I feel like is my husband, who's much more aware than maybe the average person in Loveland, but for him, I kind of told him about these microaggressions and what's happening, what I'm feeling here, and he was sympathetic towards it, but he wasn't empathetic until he watched this one movie called Get Out. I don't know if you've seen that.
Oh yeah, I love Get Out.
He watched that. He was like, "Oh my gosh, I get what you mean now."
Yeah.
And I was like, "Thank you." He's
totally.
Like, I get it.
No, and it's something that I certainly wasn't able to even begin to comprehend it until friends kind of opened my eyes to it, and it is something that it's why the work that you're doing now is so great, and we will get there. I love that about it. So you're in a city that you've never been in before.
Yeah.
You're experiencing everything that we just talked about. And yes, you are a specialist in this area, experiencing these things for yourself. But at the time, your husband is living his dream. He's, for people, VR, AR, virtual reality, augmented reality, let me try. Virtual reality, everybody's probably somewhat familiar with because it's those virtual environments you put on the headset, you can play a game, but it's basically immersing yourself in a virtual world. Augmented reality for people is a little bit different because it's a combination of the real world and the virtual world.
Right.
And that's probably the easiest way that I can explain it. But it's like...
Pokemon Go, like if anyone played Pokemon.
Okay, there you go. Yeah. Thank you. That is the perfect example. It's the real world and the virtual world combined. You usually are experiencing it through some sort of a device.
Yeah.
And it's combining the two.
Exactly.
So I know there's a story behind it, but I don't want to, Michael's part of an initial startup. As I recall, that one kind of goes under. And you guys decide that you're going to start... a new business, and he's a developer doing this work, but now you're going to take on something on your own, which is yet another big thing that you're taking on in a place you've never been.
Yeah, so he was actually part of like a larger company. They have a few headquarters in, I think, like Brazil and India and stuff.
Okay.
So it was a bigger company, but he was just starting the VR part of it.
Okay.
They started going under. For whatever reasons, and
the reasons, there's 1,000 reasons businesses fail.
That they ended up like cutting the whole VR team.
Okay.
And what's interesting about that is, even as I was doing my work in consulting and stuff, Michael and I, this about 3 years ago, we said, the more that I learned about VR through him, through his work, and what I was doing, we were like, hey, there's a place for these two to come together. And we knew that 3 years ago, and we were like, oh, we need to do diversity and inclusion through this. Like, we need to help people understand.
Yeah.
And at that time, we even had a vision board, and I actually still have it framed. So 3 years ago, I created a vision board together and for us, and it was like, we want to work in VR, and we want to work like inclusion. We want to bring these two together. Mm-hmm. So it's on there, and then there's also like we want to work with a creative team, and we want to work with Fortune hundreds, and all these different pieces there, and so it was sitting there, but at that point. Still, I was thinking about Pakistan, and so I wasn't like pushing towards that.
Right.
But it was kind of like, hey, we want to do this, but let's just put it to the side for a while. We kind of have cushy jobs, and it feels nice not to have to work for yourself and all that like stress.
Sure.
So we put it to the side. So like, fast forward to Michael losing his job, and now I'm thinking like. For me, it didn't click like, oh, this is our time. For me, it was like, oh, I've been consulting and having a lot of fun traveling, and now I'm going to have to find a more stable job to get the health insurance.
Oh, okay.
Because like he had all that, and I was just like kind of having fun.
Right, you're a contractor, you're doing consulting. So say more about that, because we kind of skipped over that. What kind of consulting are you doing, and for whom at that point?
Yeah, so firstly, it was like right after Harvard, I did some work with Harvard and like other companies on the East Coast. Okay. So more about strategic inclusion, not just like, oh, it's a part of HR and like we're doing some trainings. It's like, how do you integrate it into the full system with incentives? What are the policies that are put in place? Things like that.
Make it structural. Make it real.
Make it tied to incentives, because that's what causes change. And then, so was doing that on the East Coast, moved here. Finally, when my visa was allowed, I started working for like a more boutique firm. And again, was like traveling to DC and stuff. Same things, helping companies with, for example, like one company had like 80% turnover. And it was, so like going undercover actually into their plant as an employee and getting to experience, hey, what is it like to go through orientation? What is it like to go through the first week? And it was bad. And they were just not treating people like people. And so it comes back to inclusion as well. How do I feel like I belong? I'm part of the team. So reduce their turnover by like 30%. Wow. Yeah, it was really cool.
That's interesting. That's so great. I part of the work that I do is consulting sometimes on organizational design for things like turnover and things like training and retention and all of that.
And so much of it actually comes back to belonging, really, like to inclusion. Do I feel like I'm part of this team? But
it's so hard very often for companies to do that in ways that aren't just window dressing.
Yes. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a whole other discussion. I mean,
it's
I was
interesting.
like episode 27 or something, Kelly Dolan of Engage Partners, we talked about that's a B corporation.
Okay.
And so it's a for-profit business with a social mission. It's a social enterprise. And we talked a lot about how do you create places that retain people and make them feel valued. Yes. And she was saying, well, it's just the golden rule. You just treat people like you want to be treated. But for the CEO,
Yeah.
that
What does that
often
mean?
doesn't
Yeah.
click.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
this is the work that you're doing.
Yeah. I'm.
All of a sudden, Michael's out of work.
Yeah,
That
and I'm
company's
like,
gone under.
I need a job.
You got to find a job.
Yeah. Yeah. So then, for Michael and his team, they were like, well, I was kind of part of the process, even though I wasn't part of the team at the time. I think, like, from the business side, they kind of needed someone. So we kind of talked, and they said, they already knew that they had some massive clients wanting more work.
Okay.
So they're like, we know that this is a thing, like, we're not just going to let this go. Like, and we know we're really good at it.
Yeah, and the team is the team that he was working with at the prior place. Right. That team stays intact even though that part of the business disappears.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so I was brought on, slowly a little bit, just like helping from the business side. And the more that I got involved, I was like, oh, these are really technical founders and not definitely like not the other side of
philosophical or culture
or just business.
Right,
really.
right.
Yeah. So I started helping a lot more, and then eventually it kind of took a turn to like go more into inclusion, because right before they had actually been let go, I had helped develop a proposal for their company for doing diversity and inclusion work for someone. So they already knew that I was like well versed in this area. So we started going towards that, and then I was brought on like full time, and only then did it click for me and Michael, like, oh, this is on that vision board.
This is what we said we wanted to do.
Yeah, I was like, oh, like it didn't, I don't know why it took so long. And I think it's probably because there was so much fear involved for me that, oh my gosh, you just lost this really great job. Now I have to find like a permanent position. So I wasn't really thinking like, yay.
Well, yeah, and that's important. That's important to stop and examine for a second, because I imagine people listening to this podcast sometimes who are in those spaces saying, I want to do a thing. I've always wanted to do this thing. I have no idea how to do it.
Yeah.
And very often the moment of transition is so fear dominated that the idea of using it as the springboard to do your thing never really comes up. But time after time, people have said, that moment was the moment where the opportunity presented itself.
Yeah.
So
that's totally that's exactly what that was for us.
Yeah.
Yeah. Even though there was so much fear, I'll still say this, like even to this day, that did not feel like me that was willing to take that risk.
What do you mean?
Because I'm someone who's like very well organized. I figure everything out beforehand. Like, what's the risk going to be? Kind of hedge my,
Sure.
But this was just like, okay, we're just diving in.
So what was the risk? What was the big risk at that point?
Well, it's not like we were backed up by anyone, like no VC funding and stuff. Like, it wasn't like there was going to be any money. We were going to run out of savings, like all of us, pretty soon.
So the risk was starting something yourself versus all of you going and getting day jobs.
Yeah, where it would be very secure and we know where the money's coming from. We don't have the stress of like running it, right? Yeah. So that, yes, I think, but there was something like in that moment where I had to like really decide, and Michael's like, yeah, we really need you. Like, can you come on? And it was like, this is like going to be in a very Christian context, but it's like peace beyond understanding. Like, I don't know what other way to put it, but it was just like, whoa, like this, every aspect in this situation, I should be like drowning in anxiety, but I feel really good about this.
Right on.
And this is, for the first time, like since grad school and stuff, it started to feel like, oh, this is it. Like, this is it.
Yeah.
Not totally, but like at least that enough for me to feel like I should go down this path. Yeah.
Yep.
And so, yeah, we started with going down and, created an LLC, VECTRE.
Yep.
And
we may not even have said that yet.
Yeah, I don't know.
I'm sure I'll say it in the intro,
yet.
but the company is called VECTRE.
Yeah.
If you're, the website is vectre.xyz. So if you're listening to this and you're at your computer, you want to check out what they do, go to the website and check that out. So, but, and I want to check my version of the understanding against the actual story. It didn't seem like you were able to necessarily dive right into the inclusion work as the meat and potatoes, so to speak, of what VECTRE did. When we very first spoke, a lot of the work that you had gotten at that point was corporate work for large clients doing, and this might help people understand as well what the potential for this is. So whenever it was that we first talked to, 2 or 3 months ago, Myra invited me over to the VECTRE offices. We're about a half a block from where we're sitting right now. And I put on the headset And they put me in some of the virtual environments. So there was one that was created for a corporate client, and I'm not going to name names because I don't know. You can do that yourself. One of them was I was standing in a big box store, like it would be a Costco or it would be a Walmart, and looking at products on the shelf. And some of what you can do for corporate clients is shelf testing, one of the things that I do is consulting for businesses that are trying to do new product development. And a lot of what they do is, how do you learn about your product in the real world?
Right,
Well, you create these store environments where somebody goes into a store and then you sort of watch their behavior. And they have the ability to do that virtually. So you're not spending thousands of dollars and hours of time in a real store. The other is manufacturing environments where maybe a manufacturing company is setting up a couple of floors of a plant, and you can allow them to move huge pieces of equipment around very, very quickly and create workflows.
Yep.
That was amazing. So I'm telling your story, but I'm telling that because I want to get to where the work is going now, but also say these are the kinds of things that you guys did and still do.
Yeah. So one of those things, like where you saw that big like factory warehouse environment, that was for GE.
Okay.
And that was for, they actually ended up taking us to Germany with them last November for, it was actually part of an installation in their booth for one of the biggest like trade shows for additive manufacturing.
Right.
So so that's a great way to use VR as well to like increase your square footage in your booths at trade shows.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to tell this story because the inclusion work.
Yeah. That's my passion.
I know that's where your heart is, but I want to.
There's a lot more going on.
I love what you guys are doing.
Yeah.
It's really cool work. And for companies that are thinking about, I have this huge human interaction experiment that I need to set up, whether it's product testing or physical environment or manufacturing or workflow or just how to set up, I used to work at advertising agencies, how to set up the 3 floors of your building to facilitate good work and collaboration. That's the kind of stuff that you can do.
Right, and to be able to walk through it in VR too, I think that's really impressive. It's not just a 2D drawing or something, or even on the computer if you can do 3D, but this is like you're able to walk through it and really experience it.
You let me do a welding training. I never would have guessed at this. I used to work as a welder.
Oh, really?
And not in those environments.
Confined space,
welding creates lots of toxic, noxious gases, and one of the things you have to be very aware in the environment that you're in, how much of that you're breathing. So Myra put me into this environment where I'm crawling through tunnels down in a manhole and stick welding in a very enclosed environment, and I have to check my oxygen meter on my wrist, and I have to pay attention to the cords around me, and it's a training environment.
Right. Yeah,
That's
we do a couple of areas, and I'll just go over them quickly. So one is the training that you talked about, so safety training, and what it allows you to do is like that experiential learning, right?
Yeah.
Right now in a lot of trainings, you're sitting there listening to someone talk and watching some like goofy 90s video with like a poem at the end. And
with a desk and a notebook in front of you.
And maybe you get to take like some multiple choice at the end or something, right? This has shown to have like 75% higher retention by going through and learning in VR compared to traditional learning.
Experiential learning without the physical threat of actual death or electrocution.
Right. Yeah, so you can take like very new, trainees through it without worrying like, oh, have I taught them enough and all that.
Yeah.
So that's a huge area for us. We love that. And it's like gamified learning, right? So you get instant feedback of whether you're doing it right or wrong. Right. And it's through those mistakes that we actually learn the most. But in risky situations, you can't. You're going to die if you make those mistakes.
Right.
So training, and then like you mentioned, the product visualization when someone has a new product, like for P&Gs like Old Spice, like we're able to like recreate some designs that they have just in 2D. Mm-hmm. And they're able to walk through the store, compare it with their competitors. Like, does this look good? Does it not? How is the light hitting it?
Yeah.
And and then also we went to the next level and ended up doing consumer testing with them in VR too, so that they could take it all around the country rather than everyone come to their one store, brick or whatever they call it.
Yeah, brick and mortar. No, that's fantastic. And the environments are amazing. You step into it. I mean, it feels a little bit like you're in a video game, but it mostly just feels completely real. Yeah. Other than that you took off whatever protections were, and I could walk through the walls and knock everything down and make a huge mess.
It's fun. Yeah,
it was a lot of fun.
Yeah, it's I think once you get in there, one of the important things is as long as it's interactive, the more real it feels to you.
Yeah.
So, it's really fun for us like to go to corporate clients and like have them go through it, like these C-suite people, and when they like forget that they're in the virtual world. So like we've had people holding the controllers and there's a table in the virtual world, not in the real world, and they're about to leave the physical controllers on the table in the virtual world, and we're like, whoa, we'll grab those. Like, But, and they're like, oh my gosh, like I totally forgot.
Right,
this
that's how
real.
immersive it is.
Yeah.
So all of that is wonderful. If you're a company or business that could make use of that, please contact Myra and the team.
Please do.
And that is fantastic stuff that they're doing right here in Northside in Cincinnati. But now let's talk about, with all of that context, let's talk about the amazing work that you're doing in inclusion right now, because this is what really blew my mind. When we met and talked the first time, a lot of our conversation was about, you had heard the interview with Melis Aydoğan in one of the earlier shows. We were talking about that, both the sort of immigrant experience and the female experience in the corporate world. And I think we just scratched the surface at that point that you were starting to do this work. But now if you look at your Instagram feed, it's real stuff that you guys are doing and training people. So tell a little bit about how you could take somebody like me who doesn't have personal experience of discrimination and put me in an environment where I get to, for the first time, really feel those microaggressions and start to personalize what that means. Yeah,
so I think that, like I said, me and Michael, like he had the VR side and I had the inclusion side, and we're like, oh, there's something magical here. And like you're saying, it lets you really be that person or that character. Yeah. So, I think in our current time, like this is the greatest empathy tool that we have access to. And one of the biggest reasons for lack of inclusion or, just people leaving companies is not feeling like they belong. And it's usually because there's a lack of empathy because people haven't understood what their lived experience is, right? Yeah. So this tool, allows you to, one, you are that character and you're getting to go through the day as that character. So, right away, we make it very obvious that that's who you are, and you're not only just, there's a lot of these kinds of tools out there, but the difference is that we actually let you interact with the world. Yeah. A lot of times it's just like what we call 360 video, and it's like, okay, things are just happening to you. And when I went through those, that really actually kind of irked me because I was like, hey, I got a voice and let me use it.
Yeah, right, right.
Like, let me have a word with this man the way that he's treating me, Yeah. So what we do is, as you're going through it, and you'll feel like different, really nuanced biases, because that's what, and when we talk about microaggressions, it's those small things. So I'll give you some examples of, in our gender bias one, you're a female in the workplace, and your coworker firstly comes in late, doesn't really do his part, but then also is like cutting you off as you talk. And that's a really common thing, as you're speaking, it kind of cuts you off, or then the boss comes in and he just looks at the mail and asks him all the questions, even though you're the lead and you've done most of the work, right? And even when you answer a question, he re-asks it to the mail.
Right.
And these are all things, yes, some of them are my experience, but I've done, to be able to create this, done a lot of research from the back end. One, like this is my area of specialty, but also, obviously secondary research, a lot of like meta-analysis and lit reviews of what is gender discrimination. Yeah. So it comes with a lot of insight from there, and also done like my own like primary interviews. Right. So kind of like, what are the common areas of bias that we see in the workplace? Yeah. So you're facing all these, as the character, you're facing all these biases, and then things will happen, and we let you decide how do you want to react to it, right? So we say, you get to actually choose. So it becomes a branching narrative. Right.
So choose your own adventure.
Choose your own, yeah, exactly. Like, okay, what do you want to do? So you get to like respond, and based on that, it will branch out to another narrative, and kind of give you, each scenario changes based on your decisions, which is like, I think really awesome, because what we wanted it to be, one, that you have agency, but also we didn't want it to be, because when I first started developing the script, and just talking to different like D&I experts and like my colleagues at Harvard, we didn't want it to be that the onus was on the female or the person of color, that, hey, if you just stand up, everying works out fine, right? And that is not the reality. I can stand up 100 times and then just be told I'm difficult rather than things work out, right? Yeah. So I wanted to show that it's not just like, okay, if I stood up for myself, all good. It's like, now what else might happen? Like, what other way will this go?
Yeah.
And it might help a little bit where the guy becomes a little more aware maybe, but it's not always the situation.
Right. So when you wrote the script, you developed all this, it's a lot of coding.
Yeah.
The first time that you stepped into it, how authentic did it feel to your experience?
So actually, the first time I stepped into it, it was still very glitchy. So it was still kind of funny. But for me, honestly, it's a little hard for me to talk about it just because I've heard the script. Like, I can literally say the script, and we repeat lines in the office all the time, and people are dreaming about it. Like, that's how much we've heard it. So, but for me to have had so many females go through it, like, that's what's been really cool.
Okay.
Where they've come through and like, actually one friend went through it from P&G actually, and she said, oh my God, like, she gave me a new insight that I didn't think about as I developed it with my team, was that she said, it's really cool for me to be able to, the character is Sue that you're playing, and she's like, it's really cool that I was able to like make choices for Sue and kind of stand up to things. She's like, it made me realize that I'm facing these things every day at work, and I should be standing up for myself. And all of us, like, we were interviewing her, and all of us like got goosebumps, and we were like, whoa, like, this is an empowerment tool too.
Right, not just a training tool for me to be aware, but an empowerment tool for people that are going through it every day.
Exactly, yeah, and it was just like, oh my gosh, this is there's layers to this, you know? Yeah. And she was like, I'm not gonna deal with this anymore. Like, I need to stand up for myself.
That's
and I was
amazing.
like, thank you, that's awesome. Like, thank you for telling me that.
Yeah.
And then other women have just, we're actually gonna release a video with some of the reactions because it's just so great. But some women have like come out of it and been like, oh my gosh, this happens to me every day. And one of the first groups I went through it was actually 8451, and they were like, they're like, I could have written this script. Like, these are things that are like happening every day. So, and it's not, I don't want to, there's people who are very aware, right? And it's not like all men are bad or all, it's just the more that we can create awareness, the better for all of us. Because some of us aren't trying to be mean. We're just not aware,
Right.
So to be able to go through that, and as a man, we've had a lot of like men go through it too, and it's just been really cool where they're like, oh, I've never seen that perspective, or I never knew what that felt like. And that's exactly...
That's the point.
That's the whole point, yeah.
That's fantastic. So talk a little bit about that experience of the people that you've taken through it, and how challenging is it for them? What are their reactions when they're coming out?
Yeah, so we've had a real mixed bag, which is good. It's really good data for us.
Yeah, sure.
So, obviously, like I said, like the women going through it and being like, oh, I could have written this, or a lot of them coming out and just being really reflective of, oh, this reminds me of when this used to happen to me at work. And that's been really cool to hear those stories too. It's been cool for me as a female, but especially I'm on a team with all guys.
Yeah.
And it's really cool that, they want to do this work, and they're really interested because it's a whole new world that they didn't know about it. But to not only hear my stories, but hear all these women go through it and like get that emotion back from them, and hearing what they've been through has been really enlightening for them as well.
Yeah, because I can imagine it could be potentially easy to dismiss it. Well, this was Myra's idea, this was Myra's script. Exactly. It might only be her experience.
Exactly.
And then have woman after woman after woman say,
validated.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
And,
so, go ahead. Yeah, it's been cool to like bring out from my research, like these are the common biases, and then so I've had that backed up, but then to actually have women go through it and validate it again has been really cool.
Yeah, and it's got to be cool to see finally, after all the story of you with this desire as a teenager to do this work, going to college, now to see these two worlds merge and to see this real thing that your desire for so long has been to create.
Oh my gosh, it's because this, like you said, we started focusing a lot on the product visualization and like safety training, and this was kind of on the back burner for a long time, and I kept saying, guys, this is
where it's at.
Yeah, I was like, this is what's gonna get us big. Like I kept saying that, but just we had to do, obviously we're not VC funded, so we had to do what was paid projects.
Right.
And then finally when we did do it, and then they started seeing, like, Tech Ohio did a story on us, and Cincy, and stuff.
Yeah.
And then the team was like, oh, this is kind of big. And to see it now finally at this point where people are going through it, like it like kind of brought tears to my eyes the first time. I was like, this is happening. And, for so long I kind of went through that of like, what am I doing with my life? Like the trajectory I had for myself for females in Pakistan, like what did I do with my life, basically? Like, what happened, you know? Right. I went to a great school and still I have no, like, vision now. And to be at this point where, for the first time after so long, it was like, this is where I'm supposed to be. Yeah. It was such a cool feeling.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
I can imagine these issues, it's funny because the cultural word is woke. Yeah. Like, are you woke to these issues? Are you aware? And what that really means when you kind of unpack it is like, have you awakened to the reality that there's something other than your experience? And a lot of the discussions on the show have been around issues related to that. And I can imagine people get it or they don't get it. They get it to varying degrees. Your experience until you have another experience is what you know. And a lot of the cultural resistance to these issues that are now really politicized, the general reaction is like the not all males reaction. Yeah. Like not all of us are like that. Yep. Well, it doesn't matter. First of all, that doesn't matter. Like shut up with that. And secondly, like if somebody is listening to this and simply says, well, I'm not, fine. I'm not convinced that this is a problem. This is just people making mountains out of molehills and like these issues of discrimination, like people are just being oversensitive. Like I just want to challenge somebody to step into somebody else's shoes and say, what would it cost you to admit that somebody else has an experience other than you? And to be empathetic to that experience. And that's why this is so great. Not everybody can come to Northside and
you're welcome to though. Come on.
And put on headphones, but you're welcome to.
Yeah.
But just to say, look, this is where the research meets the reality of lived experience, and that you are doing meaningful work to get people into an environment where they can actually experience. I think one of the biggest changes in the last few years for me with regard to my awareness of this was literally the Me Too movement as expressed on Facebook. I thought I was pretty woke with regard to a lot of this stuff. I thought I was pretty aware of what my, partners and friends were going through until I saw that every single woman I know had a Me Too story. Wow. And then I couldn't say, oh, well, like some people go through this and it's a small percentage of men and it's a small percentage of women. No, it's all women. Yeah. To some degree. It's all minorities to some degree. Right. And being able to say for a second, like, I'm willing to set aside my privilege that I have as a white male and enter into your world for a second and experience how difficult it might be for you every day is something we all have to do if we're going to figure out how to live together. I'm going to step off my soapbox because it's not my soapbox, it's
I
yours.
love hearing that. It's encouraging always to like hear people talk about it. Yeah.
But I think it's really, really important work. It's great to hear that it's like this realization of so many of your dreams.
Yeah. I think it's really, like I said, it was just this idea of what I was going to be doing with women in Pakistan. And I didn't, again, like a lot of people supported me to get to that place. And I kind of, that depression was also part of that. Like I'm letting so many people down. And I never in a million years would have thought, oh, I'm going to be helping like minorities and females in America. You always think like, oh, we're going from America to help the rest of the world. But I'm like, oh, there's a lot of help needed here too. Yeah. And, this is where I am in my journey now. And, if you had probably talked to me even 6 months ago, maybe I would have still been in my depressive state, So like now you're getting like at the top of where I'm really excited. But it's also too important, I think, I just want to say, because for some people, it takes longer to get out of that. And I just really want to, like, give time for that to say, like, it's okay to be in that state. And maybe it's kind of hard to talk when you are in that state, though.
Yeah, and maybe that state is what you need to go through and take your time in order to figure out what the thing is.
What it is you really want to do, yeah. But, so I feel really good now. And just, I'm so... you can probably hear it, but I'm just like so passionate and so excited about it all the time. And I'm at that point where I realize, oh, these were all the things that were coming together for this. Yep. That's what it feels like.
To make it possible.
And I know that's like a really awesome place to be, but again, I want to talk.
Good.
Like obviously not everyone's in that space, but it's really cool to be here now. And it doesn't necessarily mean like oh, this is what I'm doing for the rest of my life. But right now, for the first time in so long, it's like, oh, this makes sense.
Yeah.
And eventually, like, I do hope I can do work in Pakistan, and maybe it's going to be through a different way than I thought.
Sure.
But to be able to, especially right now with our gender bias stuff, be working with women and just like helping men be more aware of what's going on.
Yeah.
I think just like providing tools for both sides to be able to talk about it. And one of the cool things of going through this experience is we ask them questions at the end of it. So like, how did this experience make you feel? And there's like different range of emotions. Mm-hmm. And, there's anger on there, there's neutral and frustrated. And I think when we run through companies through this, that data is going to be really powerful because there's going to be a bunch of questions asked, and we're going to be able to do debriefs and be like, hey, 15 of you like felt really angry. Like, what was that anger about? And it's going to give women the place of, there's 14 other people who felt angry. This is now a shared experience that I can talk about and explain what that anger is, because I face that on a daily basis. Yeah,
and so much of the hindrance to speaking up and changing it is feeling alone. Like, I'm the only one who's going through this.
Yes, and I think that's what's so powerful is like it's not just like a video like you've taken from the store and like showing people and like, oh, but that doesn't happen here. Now I can show you. No, 15 of you are are angry. What's that about?
Quantitative
this is you
research
guys.
to back this up, and that will only grow over time.
Yeah, exactly. So we're using it as a diagnostic tool as well. Like the experience is really important. I want to elicit that emotion. I want empathy. That's my goal, because that's what leads. Perspective taking is what leads to empathy. Mm-hmm. But I want it to be like research background. Like, I want it to be based in something where your team can have an assessment to be like, this is where the state is right now. Where do we go from here?
Yeah. What have they thought of your journey? You talked about your own disappointment of feeling like you weren't getting home.
Yeah.
I don't want to pry. That's your family's business.
Totally
but
fine.
I sort of want to know, like, how have they been with you through all of this, and then what do they think about this work that you're doing now?
Okay, so obviously, like I said, medicine would have been number one.
Sure.
Yeah. And then, it's funny that I'd be considered a black sheep. Like, I went to Harvard and I'd still be considered a black sheep.
You're the Harvard-educated black sheep.
Yeah. But I think mostly for my parents, like a big part for South Asian culture is just to be like, stability is what they want for their kids. And my mom was always like, as long as my kids are settled, whatever they're doing, as long as they're settled. I don't know if they're going to listen to this, but I don't think that they fully understand what I'm doing. Yeah. And it's because, like, my parents are still in their work, like they're in their 60s and they're still really involved in their work. So, my sister's in Chicago in residency, and, that's really easy context for them to understand.
Yeah,
they get that. And even like my brother doing, if he's doing like molecular biology, it's still in the medical realm, and they can like understand that he's in the UK, but they get it. Yeah. For me, I'm doing business one, like, which is so different. And then like virtual reality. I mean, every time, my dad loves it. I will say every time we went home and took like some headsets and stuff, and he was like, I have the video, his mouth was just like hanging open.
That's great.
And it was because he got to go inside the cell and like see it from, he's like, I need this for my nurses. Like, I need this for my nurses. And anytime I post something on Twitter about like training and different kinds, he's like, the medical field is what needs this. You should be doing this in the medical field, like, creating like, I was like, yes, there's tons of applications.
We'll get there. Yeah. Give us a second.
Yeah. So they get VR and they're excited about it, but I think this is going to be one of those things, until they experience it, they won't know. And thankfully they're coming in like end of June.
Cool.
So I really we'll take a headset and like they'll be in Chicago and to be able to share that stuff.
Good.
When I was doing the organizational development stuff, my dad got that and he was like, whoa, that's like really cool stuff.
Yeah.
So, I mean, this is kind of related to that. But
absolutely related.
They're really big about cultural competency, cultural competency.
Yeah.
And so they're going to get that part of it, because this is really cultural competence. It's social competency, right? It's really just emotional intelligence, and they're huge about that. My dad's really big about that. So if I talk about it in that context, he'll get it. But diversity and inclusion is very much like a Western like concept, where we're just talking about it in different ways in other parts of the world. Yeah.
I mean, using technology to build social and cultural competency, though, is a wonderful, I hadn't really thought about the intersection. I mean, that's everything that we're talking about.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
that's good stuff to explain. And it sounds like we were talking about you not being able to go back. You haven't been able to move back, but you go back.
Yeah.
You get to visit.
So I went back, I think last year it was the first time my family, because my family's like all over the world, it was the first time I had seen my brother in 6 years.
Oh, wow.
It was kind of crazy. That's part of, I guess, the international lifestyle.
Yeah.
But it was the first time our family all got together, and with like the first time with our husbands and wives and stuff. So it was really
that's
cool.
so good.
Yeah. And then my parents will come in June, so
Great,
I'll get to see them
How do
again.
your siblings feel about it? Do you talk to them about it much? Sounds like they're pretty busy.
About like my job or like our work. Like actually my one of my younger brothers does like data analysis, so he's actually helping me with the research side.
Cool.
Which has been really cool. Like he does data visualization and stuff. So that's been cool. Again, it is really hard. We do WhatsApp and chat and stuff, but it's really hard being so far away. Like that's actually for me, like the biggest pain point. It's just like, I want to be around my family, like all these milestones I don't get to share with them. But that is hard. But they kind of know what I'm doing, and I share like website and stuff. But until they're here, they're not going to get it.
Until they can put on the headset and walk through it.
Yeah.
Well, and the same is true for anybody who's listening. Until you can put on the headset and walk through it, it's really difficult to explain how amazing this is. But it sounds like the chances are increasing for people.
Yeah, and
to do more of that.
Right now we're working with we're trying to figure out how to exactly pitch it. Like, do we pitch it as social competency? Because that's all it really is. But are people going to understand what that means?
Right.
You need to take the current pie, we need to take a piece of it to make sense for something new. But we are using it for like leadership. Because really it is, if you want to be a good leader, you got to have good EQ and, and just be aware of how you're working with your employees. So we're talking with like GE Aviation right now, and we're going to actually run their C-suite through it. So it's going to be cool. And I did not know like what huge advocates of like inclusion GE Aviation was. Like it was.
That's wonderful.
It's been amazing to talk to them and just to see like how not just like inclusion but sexual harassment issues and stuff. So we want to. Right now we're focusing on gender, but we want to build out something about race, about LGBTQ. We want to build out about accessibility. Like there is not a limited amount of content. Like there's so much, And so that's gonna be next steps. But we want this to be eventually software as a service model where you're just buying these like just like $399 dollar headsets. Buy the headphone. We review in a beautiful package, and like your team can go through it. We will change the issue like every 6 months if you want. Like it can be race, and then it can be like other stuff. So.
What a great idea. I mean, it's so good because even in conversations with people about how do you increase the EQ in leadership teams, how do you awaken somebody to an experience that isn't theirs in a way that they can actually, empathy comes from experience, from shared experience. You can't empathize with something
shared
you can't imagine.
That's it. Yeah.
And the more you experience it, the better you can imagine it. The more you can imagine it, the more you can empathize with somebody, and then the more you can change behavior around it. So this, as opposed to just reading a book or going
the
through
case
a classroom
studies,
training.
the role playing. It's yes, you're hitting it, but it's also super goofy trying to do role playing. And I think that Randall from MasterCard just had this awesome interview, which I reposted on my LinkedIn because I was like, yes, Randall, like I love this. And he talked about unconscious bias is great, training is great, but it's talking about like, when at 5-year-old I felt excluded or something. What we really need to talk about is in context of what's happening, because that's what is going to lead to a path of behavioral change, is when you're seeing it in context. And so, he was talking about, he does it through case studies by like talking to people, his employees, and being like, what are the things that are happening? Mm-hmm. And I was talking to him about that we're taking that a step further. Yeah. Yes, we're taking those complaints, but we're like letting you step into them, not just talk about them or read about them.
Yeah, a little case study for what happened to somebody a week ago, but like enter into that experience.
Enter into it, and what did that feel like, and why were they, and then have like a session after, like what were the emotions that came up, and why would someone feel like that, and why would someone do that?
Every HR department of every company in America not wanting something.
Right?
Like
you would hope, if they have the budget.
Right.
Yeah.
If they can afford it.
But it's getting cheaper as well, right? Like right now we're using headsets that were like $1,200. Now we're going to start using something that's $399. Like
Right.
Oculus, like Facebook just came out with something which we just got 2 days ago, and we're pretty pumped about it.
Cool.
Yeah.
Cool. Making it more and more and more accessible.
Yep.
Cool. Well, Myra, this is great work. I love it. I love hearing what you're doing. I love hearing your story. And I
Yeah.
can't wait to see where you guys take it. It seems like a huge need and a great opportunity. So
Well, yeah, thank
we'll be
you.
watching. And if anybody, we'll put the information up on our website, links to their site. If this is interesting to you, find out more, visit, hire them, bring them in to do what you do. But thanks for
Yeah.
spending the time with us.
Definitely. Yeah, and we'll do, like, we did with you, we'll do demos, and we've gone to companies, and I think part of our thing is about education, too,
Yeah.
like just telling about what's possible. So thank you so much for having me.
Oh.
This was so fun.
We finally made it happen.
We made it happen, yes.
All right. Thanks, Myra. This episode of The Distiller was recorded live at Sidewinder Coffee, a wonderful independent neighborhood coffee shop located at 4181 Hamilton Avenue in Northside, Cincinnati, Ohio. Thanks to Brandon and the Sidewinder crew for hosting us on a holiday morning, especially at short notice, and we had another location fall through. You can link to Sidewinder's website and social media pages from our website at thedistillerpodcast.com. And thanks finally to Myra Ballentine for hanging out with us and telling her story. The work she and the VECTRE team are doing is not only really cool from a technology standpoint, it's also deeply important in terms of the education and the understanding that these tools facilitate. I have no doubt you're going to be hearing more about this work in the future, and if you're interested in learning more or in hiring VECTRE for any of the great work they do, visit our website at thedistillerpodcast.com, where we have links to their website and social media pages, and you can also see a video demo of their work. The Distiller is produced, recorded, and hosted by me, Brandon Dawson. Our show is mixed and edited by Justin Golden, with logo design by Scott Ryan and video work by Mike Helm of Minute Moments Pictures. You can find The Distiller wherever you listen to podcasts, and you can listen and download every episode of the show at thedistillerpodcast.com, where we also have links, photos of the guests, and a map of every one of our show locations. If you like what we're doing, please follow, like, and share our posts on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And you can also help support The Distiller and help us cover some of the costs involved in producing and airing the show by going to thedistillerpodcast.com and clicking on the Become a Patron button for more information. And finally, we do love it if you rate and review The Distiller wherever you listen. That actually is meaningful to helping us get the word out about the show. You can always get in touch with us. You can email at mail@thedistillerpodcast.com to tell us who you think should be on the show to talk about their search for meaningful work or where you think we should record the next episode. But whether you do it by email, on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram, please do drop us a line. We love to hear from you. So, until next time, I'm Brandon Dawson. Thank you for listening to The Distiller. Bye-bye.